Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Artsbeat TV and radio here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer this morning. And our first guest is a musician, composer, sound designer, actor, and more, Alexander Sovronsky. Alexander has done work throughout theaters nationally, on and off Broadway, and holds Western New England and the theaters as part of his home turf, so to speak. First of all, Happy New Year, Alexander. How you doing?
Thank you so much, Mark. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm doing well.
Thank you.
Stuck in New York, so I'm kind of making the best of what I got on a snowy day in New York.
We last talked, I guess, during the summer or late spring, early summer, on a different series that I was doing called How We're Doing, which was how people were surviving the pandemic. And obviously, you've made it through 2020. But when we talked, you said your entire calendar was kind of like wiped clean.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of resolve for you? How were you able to get through the year?
Well, I mean, kind of adjust your expectations. I think like many, if not all artists, I'm on unemployment right now because there's no work available. There's a lot of concern from me and a lot of the other artists in my community. I'm sure, hopefully, as much as your listeners are aware of, that the unions are unable to sustain health insurance through the periods of time when they were expecting to, because with no money coming into the unions from productions, from theaters, there's no money available, not as much money able to pay out for the unions for their members. So everyone's just kind of being hit by this in really, really difficult ways. And I'm certainly hoping that the new administration will be able to find some sort of arts support, because it's certainly an industry that's probably going to be one of the last ones to open, and certainly one of the ones that is one of the hardest hit, because it's not just a couple productions here and there. It's the entire industry is shut down.
Well, I know that in the Berkshires, 2 theaters were able to come back on a limited basis, Barrington Stage and Berkshire Theater. But it looks like Broadway is going to be shut down at least through the summer at this point.
Oh, at least.
And so I would, since you do a lot of regional theater work, are Barrington Stage and Berkshire Theater the only regional theaters that have found a way to reopen, or are there some elsewhere that are kind of back on their feet?
Well, it's not even a back on their feet thing. I mean, I'm sure there are theaters all over the country that are struggling to do things here and there, the same way as Barrington and Berkshire Theater Group are. I mean, but by no means are they operating at anywhere near full capacity, either for employing of the artists that they normally would, or quite frankly, paying those artists the rates that they normally would. And that's not a dig against the theaters. That's just the reality of when you don't have as much money coming in, you can't have as much money going out. So I know for myself and a lot of other fellow artists that have been able to find a little bit of work here and there in the theater, it is on at a slightly with an understanding, basically, that everyone's operating at a loss, which makes it hard and makes it certainly a blessing when you're able to get work, but certainly not the kind of sustaining financial situation that it normally would be. And also as actors and artists, certainly, I'll speak for myself, I can't make a living doing only one show at a time. I tend to have to layer productions, especially as a designer. I'm able to, design a couple productions at once, or be able to be performing in one show and composing for another. So typically I'm juggling 3 or 4 shows at any time. And now I've done maybe 1 or 2 projects in the last, 9 months, 10 months. So it's a very different situation. And for me, the way I'm looking at the work that is out there now, it's more about sustaining me artistically, that I have a project, I have something to put my energies towards, which feels wonderful, But certainly financially, it's a very different situation than I think it would be. But there are theaters out there that are doing little productions here and there. They tend to be one-person shows, and a lot of them if they're not performing in person, which I don't know if many, if any, at this point are doing anything in person, because with COVID restrictions, I don't know if you can do anything indoors at this point. But there are a lot of theaters that are finding ways to do like Zoom readings or play readings, or being able to broadcast previously archived performances for people to view and things like that. People are finding ways to kind of bring theater online or in like the Zoom world. But by no means is it the same as being in front of a live audience.
Now, you chose to ride out the storm of the pandemic in New York City. Is New York coming back to life in any way at this point as we move into the new year, or are things pretty much shut down?
Well, I mean, I live up in Washington Heights, and I live in a pretty residential area, so I tend to stay in my area. And where I am, the restaurants certainly have found ways to have outdoor seating. And now that we're moving into the winter, some of them are having those outdoor seatings covered partially with like plastic, with like heaters inside, so people can still come in at a limited basis. So there's still like life happening, but it's certainly nothing like it was. I haven't gotten down to any part of the theater districts just because I know that it's shut down. The one thing that's sometimes kind of weird is seeing a cab go by on the street and they still have an advertisement for a Broadway show from January or February, So it's interesting to see that there's elements of the city that are kind of stuck in time, so to speak. It's as if time froze back in March and nothing's really moved forward in some respects. Certainly in terms of theater advertising, there's still a lot of marquees up in Midtown for shows that closed, and will not reopen months and months and months ago. So it's there's still life. There's still people here. There has been, I know, as many news outlets have reported, like quite a mass exodus of artists and other people from the city. But the fact is that it's still a vibrant place to live, and I still have a lot of friends here that I'm able to, take socially distant walks with, and still be able to have like little Zoom calls with, and I'm able to go grocery shopping. I'm able to take my walks on the water and things like that. But it's certainly a modified existence, that's for sure.
It seems so ironic, though, that maybe a year ago or a couple of years ago, you and I were talking, and actually on the program, and you were so excited to be leaving the Berkshires to move to New York City, and had found the place and everything. And in the last year, so many New Yorkers have come up this way to live, to escape New York, and they can work remotely and everything, that every place I run into people that are in the arts community, they gave up their places in New York City, they gave up their Manhattan or Brooklyn things to live simply and quietly in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, there's always a return to nature at some point, but certainly this pandemic is accelerating that, I think. I think I'm in a nice situation, though. I'm able to live alone in Manhattan, and I have an apartment right near the water, so I feel like I still have a little bit of access to nature, which is quite nice. But it is kind of oddly ironic that the moment I get back to New York, New York kind of stops being the thing I moved to New York for. But there's been a really nice thing that I think a lot of people are experiencing, which is those of us that are trying to make the most of the pandemic instead of necessarily like focusing on all the negative as much as we can, is that there is a forced self-reflection period that has kind of been occurring. So as an artist, I certainly feel that the pandemic is kind of forcing me to get back to some projects that I never had time for on my own, when I was working and I was always juggling a million things. So suddenly I'm like, oh, I have time to read those books, or to think about how I would teach that class, or to revisit certain pet projects of mine that are more personally driven than driven by another institution that would hire me. So there's been a nice little return to my own artistic impulses, but I feel like that would have happened regardless if I was in New York or the Berkshires. It's just the nature of the speed at which we're all moving.
Yeah, you said something about classes, and I remember at some point in the summer you were offering music instruction online. Did that take off for you? And is it difficult to teach music through Zoom as opposed to one-on-one in a studio or a class?
I've had the opportunity to teach a couple people, and it's been actually really, really lovely. I love teaching. It's something that I've done periodically throughout the last 20, 25 years of my career. And it's certainly difficult because you can't, especially with string instruments or when I teach woodwind instruments, or even when I teach a voice, like basically any instrument, sometimes it's the slightest bit of tension in the performer's body or in a young student's body that you might want to help them relax and adjust into. And when you only can see a portion of their body on Zoom from one angle, it's hard to get a full sense of what's going on, I think. But I think everyone's dealing with those limitations in whatever field they're in. But ultimately, it's a new world, and we're trying to make the most of it. And the one thing that's really helped me through it is reminding myself why people want to learn music in the first place. It's an escape. It's something they want to do for their soul to make them happy. And it's something that brings them joy. And when I do have the opportunity to teach music, I focus on that. It's not so much about, let's make sure you're holding the violin at the right angle. Let's make sure your bow position is 100% perfect. It's like, look, you're a beginner. I'm going to be very forgiving. But let's make sure that we don't lose the joy. Let's make sure that we focus on keeping this a joyful experience so that when you pick up the instrument, it's something you're looking forward to at any age. That it's not something that you feel like, oh no, I have to practice again. I hate practicing. It's just something that everyone experiences. So I try to make at least the practicing element of things still something joyful. Because I think ultimately the technique will come in time. As long as you're not developing really bad habits that will hurt you or injure you physically or artistically, as long as you're not doing that, I want to just keep the joy alive and make sure that music is something that people are still looking forward to doing in this time, even if we can't all be together playing in the same room.
And I know that you do a lot of composing for scores for plays, not musicals, but a drama or comedy. And a lot of your work has been heard behind the scenes in many plays. Have you continued to compose for upcoming productions, or do you compose for yourself, finding something that inspires you to create music? So someday there might be an Alexander Sovronsky CD of original work.
I've always thought about that, but it hasn't quite manifested just yet. But for those people that are interested in hearing the music, there's certainly clips available on my website, which is just alexandersovronsky.com. But as far as the music that I write, it tends to be, and has traditionally been in my career, always stuff that I've written for other people and for other productions. For me, theater is about service, and I enjoy being working in service of a play. There's something that is terribly weird to me. I'm getting over it right now, but it's certainly a new situation, which is, when I don't have a play or a project to serve, and I'm just serving myself as an artist, what do I want to create? And that's, I think, a question that a lot of artists and collaborative artists are asking themselves. I think as theater artists, as any type of artist that work in any type of collaborative field, it feels very different to be on your own and to be working on a project, with nobody else, or on your own, or just a project that you're starting from scratch for no one else but yourself. I think that's certainly there are certain performers out there that are comfortable with that, and there are others like myself that are more used to a collaborative process. And without that, it feels certainly different. But I have had the good fortune. Barrington has hired me for a number of their projects during the pandemic, and the latest of which is a play, which is a Zoom play, which has been adapted by a novel by Ty Allen Jackson, a Pittsfield resident and author. And he wrote a book called The Super Duper Kid. And then he wrote a book that was a sequel, The Super Duper Kid 2. And Julie Boyd and Ty, I think, have adapted that for a community cast, a cast of community actors from the area. And we taped them all doing the show, and then I added all the sound effects and music underneath it. So I've had some projects to work on, but again, they're all modified, and all Zoom based, you know?
Yeah. In
I
fact,
think that the last thing I did, so the last thing I did in person, the last thing I did as an in-person theater experience was Harry Clark over the summer in August, I think, at Barrington Stage. And since then, everything's been virtual.
yeah, I was going to say I did not get to see that. It was the one play I really wanted to go to last summer or post-pandemic. We should beginning of the pandemic, but the person that goes with me to the theater was just petrified of going, into a crowd. So kind of got talked out of it. But you, right before the pandemic began, you had done the sound for Barrington Stage's 10 by 10 New Play Festival. So,
Oh, yeah.
so you actually, that was one of the last shows that was mounted before things closed down. But I wanted to say that at your website, I have listened to a lot of clips of music that you've composed, probably because I've reviewed many of the shows. But there's one show that you composed music to. It's a Tony Kushner play, and you composed it for a production in Hudson County, New York, or the Capital
Oh,
Region.
yeah.
It was at Homebody Cobble it was the play, but it's a 45-second snippet of music that you composed for this that's on your website that goes through my mind all the time. It's really completely separate from what the play was about because I didn't get to see the play, but the music stood out to me as kind of exciting.
Oh, thank you very much. That was at a really wonderful theater called the Ankrum Opera House. And they are a wonderful, wonderful venue run by some really lovely people. And then in that instance, they actually only wound up doing the first act of Kushner's play, Homebody Cobble. And the way the play is structured is that the first act of the play is just one long monologue with one person on stage. And the second act has more characters. And traditionally it is done as the first act is performed, and then you do the second act after an intermission. But they got special permission to just do the first act, to just present the monologue as a single piece of theater. So that's why it's on my website listed, and also in all of their press material listed as just Homebody, because we just did basically the first half of the play. So that was a really cool experience to be able to design for that. And it was a very fast experience, and they called me, and they were already going into tech. I think that they had some last-minute issues with their music and sound planning. And I was called in and kind of at the last minute came in and wrote a score for them. And it was very exciting and very collaborative and really fun at a really lovely space that I'd never been to before. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go down to the
I've never been.
Opera House.
I've never been, but it's on my to-do list when we get to go see live theater again.
Yeah, it's a really, really beautiful space. If anyone can, once the world reopens, I hope that they're able to continue producing there. It's a really lovely space run by some really lovely people.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to tell people, we're going to end the entire program today with one of your songs, which is a cover of one of the most beautiful scores in musical theater from My Fair Lady. Do you ever delve into musical theater of that genre? This is the first time I've ever heard you record anything from Broadway.
Oh yeah, it's something that I've always enjoyed. I think I grew up as many people do. I think I grew up listening to a lot of Broadway scores and things like that. And I certainly, as a performer, in addition to being a composer and designer, as a performer, I have done musicals my whole career. I wouldn't say that I have like a voice made for Broadway, but I certainly have a more, I think, folky kind of voice. And I really enjoy singing. I really love it. And I'm typically drawn to just my own personal style, a lot of music from the early to mid 20th century. So during the pandemic, actually, one of my pet projects is I found myself revisiting a lot of music from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, like that whole era. Sometimes Broadway, sometimes more vaudeville, and some of the early 20s and 1910 stuff. A lot more scores that were produced as like individual hits for a singer here and there. But a lot of the music from that period I find really beautiful. They tend to be some really heartbreakingly lovely love songs, and there's something about the quality of the way it's written and the style of it that I think just suits me really nicely. And I normally don't venture into a lot of musical theater covers, but I found myself stumbling upon On the Street Where You Live, and the lyrics spoke to me, and it just felt like a really nice pandemic song. The idea I've been wandering around my own neighborhood for 9, 10 months here, and I haven't taken the subway since February. So I'm seeing the same streets over and over and over. And there was just something lovely about the idea of this song about that starts with, I have often walked along the streets before, and it's like, well, yeah, that feels pretty true. And the idea of seeing something that you've passed by a million times before, and suddenly it feels more beautiful for whatever reason. In the song's case, of course, because you're in love, but the idea of the repetition of it kind of spoke to me in that moment.
Yeah, I was touched by the recording. I've actually was in a production of it because it was a classic by the time I got around to musical theater. Absolutely stunning score, and I did see the revival in New York a couple of years ago.
Oh, good.
And it's a beautiful story that's still kind of relevant today, and all of that. Have you been able to escape New York at all since the pandemic started? I know that your family's up here, or have you stayed specifically in the city?
I've stayed primarily in the city. I've had a couple moments where I have been able to get a COVID test and be able to check on my family. My father and my mother live in Connecticut, and so does my grandmother. And I'm trying to be super careful about not seeing anyone else in New York so that I can be able to keep my bubble really, 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 really tight. And my mother and father have both been working from home, I think, since early March. So they also haven't seen anybody. So unfortunately, it's been about a year since I've seen my sister, who lives out in Utah, and she can't go anywhere because for a variety of reasons, but also the way the COVID situation has played out in Utah specifically has been pretty difficult, with their governor not being as helpful as a lot of the other governances across the country. Certainly not as strict as New York. So the numbers in Utah are a little bit more concerning. So they're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But luckily, during the pandemic, the FaceTime and Zoom and all that kind of stuff has been a saving grace. My grandmother is 92, and we got her an iPad over the spring and taught her how to use FaceTime and Zoom. So she's able to connect with people, which I think has been a real saving grace for her. And mainly anyone that is stuck indoors. We crave human connection. And even though we can't be there in person, even just seeing someone's smiling face on the end of a call can really help brighten a day. So
I think
been really helpful for her.
I've also gone back to the old-fashioned concept of picking up the phone and calling a friend every once in a while, because the thing that I miss the most about the pandemic is, even with social distancing and all of that, the ability to go meet somebody for a cup of coffee is just so impossible now that there's a foot of snow on the ground, and also.
Yeah, well, then there's this weird, especially in the warmer months in New York, I was able to meet friends socially distant. We would sit on either side of an outdoor table and be able to share a cup of tea or coffee outside. But as it gets colder, that's going to get harder and harder, of course. But there's something. I think one thing that's been really nice also about the pandemic, if we're talking about just some of the positives, has been I've been biking a lot. I have a bicycle in Manhattan, and I've been really exploring my neighborhood a lot more. And it's been really wonderful just to not rely on subways and kind of going off to work and just forgetting that I have a whole universe to explore where I live. And since I haven't lived in Manhattan for 5 or 6 years because I was in the Berkshires, it's actually been kind of nice to return to it and see it with a different rhythm,
And I would assume that because of the pandemic, there's not as much traffic on the streets of Manhattan.
Oh God, no. It's been much safer, especially for me as a bicyclist. It's I feel not nearly as terrified as I normally would biking in Manhattan.
We're out of time. We're out of time, Alexander Sovronsky, and I want to thank you for joining me and wishing you the best for a happy, healthy New Year. But before we go, what's the website that people can connect to catch some snippets of your music?
Sure, it's just my name. Thank you so much again. It's alexandersovronsky.com. That's Alexander, SOVRONSKY.com. That's all it is. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Well, I hope we get a chance to connect in the new year, that by summertime activity kind of rebounds in the Berkshires, particularly with the visionary spirit that both Barrington Stage and Berkshire Theater Group have in terms of.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And just so you know, and for your listeners, like keep an eye out on the Barrington Stage website, because I think we're trying to find ways to be able to produce the 10 by 10 festival this year in some fashion. So keep your eyes peeled on that one.
That sounds great. Alexander Sovronsky. We're going to take a break and acknowledge the underwriters that make Artsbeat TV and radio possible. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach. Don't go away.
Is provided by Betts Plumbing and Heating Supply Company, an independent, family-owned wholesaler serving Westfield for over 50 years, specializing in plumbing, heating, and industrial piping supplies. On the web at bettsplumbing.com or at 14 Coleman Avenue in Westfield.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
This is Ken Stomsky from Ken's Den on WCPC 15 and 89.5 FM, Tuesdays, 8 to 10.
Community Radio
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back, everyone, to Artsbeat TV and Radio here on Westfield Community Programming, Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm Mark Auerbach. Our next guest is Max Hartshorne, who is the publisher of Go Nomad, which is a travel publication. You may think, well, who's traveling these days? But with so many theaters shut down right now and so many festivals not happening, you still want to get out of the house. Max has covered a lot of things to do, places to see in Western Massachusetts, Northern Connecticut, and also has covered arts festivals nationwide and internationally. So first of all, Happy New Year and good morning, Max.
Great to be with you again on this chilly post-snow day here.
Yeah, winter has arrived in full force. Max, the theaters are closed, and people get stir-crazy being indoors in the winter. And for people who don't necessarily want to go out there and snowshoe or ski or find a lake to skate on, are there places people can go during the winter months that offer some great scenery here within an hour's drive or so from the valley?
Well, you're right, Mark. It certainly is tough when you consider that your beat is theater, and that means being inside. And I sympathize with anybody in the theater business because I get those weekly emails from the Pioneer Valley Theater News, and I keep thinking how sad it is that it's all virtual. I think we just have to be more creative and start to think about ways to try to, do it. Like, for instance, I got to see a wonderful concert this year. I went up to New Hampshire. I went to Swansea, New Hampshire before it was cold, and I got to see a Grateful Dead cover band playing at a drive-in theater outside, and we each had our own little 6-foot space. But that was the last time I enjoyed the arts, Mark, was outside at the drive-in theater at Swansea to see that Grateful Dead show.
Yeah, Max, it's funny because the Mahawi Theater in Great Barrington hooked up with Simon's Rock, and Berkshire Theater Group in Pittsfield and Stockbridge hooked up with one of the high schools, and they did outdoor drive-in movies where you would watch a movie, like a popular old film from your car. So it was a chance to get out of the house. And there were a bunch of concerts that took place in a drive-in movie format in Southwick and some of the neighboring towns. So people were able to get outside. Of course, now with the winter months and the inability for theaters to produce indoors, if you want to get out of the house and go somewhere, a walk in the winter or something like that, what are some of the places that you'd recommend?
Well, it's tough, Mark, because there's so few options. But, I guess, I know you talked before about the things you can and you can't do. Well, you can certainly go out and walk, and you can certainly go ice skating, I guess, and you could go skiing is going to happen this year. I have a lot of friends that are getting ready for skiing, because you can go in a bubble in that lift just with you and your partner. But it's a real challenge. I don't know if I could answer that, how to do anything artistically, except to continue to do what we do, which is to enjoy things on the old Zoom screen and hope for the best, and just keep looking at the time frame in which we'll get our jabs so we can get back out there. I don't know, Mark. I don't have a lot of good ideas except to just be patient and remember it's around the corner. We're going to get out of this.
You cover the travel business on so many levels, and I know that business travel has pretty much ground to a halt, but there is some personal travel happening. How long do you think it's going to be before people are going to feel confident enough to get on a plane and go somewhere?
Well, in my business, people are always asking that question. And I have to say the consensus I'm getting now between the cruises and between the resumption of being able to go to Europe and even being able to go to Canada, I think that we're looking at about the third quarter of 2021. I think by the third quarter mark, a lot of us will have been vaccinated, and many, many more people will feel confident. I don't think that this winter, I don't think we're going to be doing anything in February or January, but I do have so many trips that I need to make. There's so many conferences that I had to cancel. Sicily was one, Mexico was another, China was a third, so I do feel that there's a pent-up interest in traveling and that there's people, no matter what, they want to do it. But I think the jab is really what we need. We need that shot, and then we'll feel better. So I think, Mark, third quarter of let's say, like next summer, I think we're going to be okay. We're going to be out of the woods. I think confidence-wise and, vendor-wise, our ducks will be lined up better at that time.
Yeah, but it's funny. I look on a lot of the travel websites, and the airlines right now are offering phenomenal discounts to go out, just to warm weather destinations. And airlines like JetBlue have launched a lot of New England to Florida flights, and some of the other airlines to Hawaii, and particularly from Canadian airports and things like that. Are people still traveling even though they're not supposed to?
They really are, Mark. That I would agree with you. And the other big change, which has been a sea change, is the fact that there's no longer change fees, even on the most expensive flights. You could book a flight to China or Japan and make a change and avoid that $200 change fee. I mean, that's a huge thing. And that's one thing we have to be thankful for, because after the pandemic, we don't have to worry about changing our tickets. And, besides Southwest, that's been a real big, huge source of revenue for these airlines that need money. But, the little secret about airlines is that they're flying a lot of flights because airlines are filled with mail, and passengers are not in the seats, but below the seats, the belly of the planes are full of air freight. Planes are flying all over the place because they need to move the mail and they move the freight. So I think that, there's a few secret lines, fantastic deals, as you said. I mean, I get emails all the time. If I want to go to California right now, I bet you I could get a really cheap flight, and Mexico too. And I don't think it's that dangerous to go to a place like Mexico, and I think I could survive the flight. So that's what you have to decide.
Have you flown during the pandemic?
I have not flown, Mark, but I have taken Amtrak twice. I went down to Joe Biden's hometown of Wilmington, Delaware, just at the time when he was accepting the nomination. And I was so excited about being in Wilmington and Joe Biden's hometown. And I actually stayed in a hotel that was right backed up against the place where Joe and Kamala accepted the nomination. It was really exciting. And, Amtrak wasn't bad at all, Mark. I took a ride down. I went right from Greenfield, which, remember, we can do that now. We can get on a train in Greenfield and right down to Manhattan, and then right down to Wilmington. It was a very easy flight, really easy trip. And, Amtrak is not crowded. They don't pack people in. So I felt very good about that part of the travel. It wasn't scary at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Amtrak. I mean, I have not been on a train since March, and or since right before the pandemic. And I went in for a Saturday matinee, and I took Amtrak in. And the train was packed. And I see the trains go. I walk down in Long Meadow along the Connecticut River where the wildlife refuge is, and the Amtrak goes through there, and the CT rail, and the trains go by, and they don't look crowded at all.
No, I in my train, I mean, I went all the way from Greenfield. It was practically empty until we got to Northampton, and then a few people get on. But, the thing is that we really were having a resurgence. Just before the pandemic, we were really lucky to have these CT rail trains, Hartford line. I mean, 10 trips a day, for God's sake. That's real nice, from Greenfield even. And I think that it will be scaled back. In fact, there's a big movement right now. It's sort of under the radar, but the East-West Rail is really happening. Eric Lesser, the representative from Long Meadow, has long been pushing this. And they're so mad because they came up with another study. This is like the fourth study in a row. And Mass DOT just makes these studies, and they put them on the shelf, and they let them sit there and get dusty. Well, this time, the rail advocates, the government, people who are really interested in promoting rail are saying, come on, we've studied this enough. It's time to frigging act and get rail from Pittsfield to Springfield to Boston. And I think it's going to happen, Mark. I really do. I think it's going to happen.
I sure like to happen. There's always been one train a day from Boston to Chicago that goes through Springfield, Worcester, Springfield, and Pittsfield on its thing. And out of curiosity, a few years ago, I took it. I'd gone into Boston for a meeting and taken the bus, and I decided I wanted to see what this train was all about, because they were talking about it would take forever and it wasn't viable, blah blah blah. And I found the trip from Boston to about Worcester to just be like, the scenery was sort of like Metro North, as you were getting closer to the city, a lot of overpasses, underpasses, and all. But when the train left Worcester from that point until it got to almost outside of Springfield, it was absolutely beautiful when it went through the Brookfields and all of that. But it was very slow. It stopped many times. It took about 2 hours. And I thought that if they could get train service restored, I would much rather take the train from Springfield to Boston than drive or take a bus.
Well, there's a huge number of people, Mark, in your position that could walk, or they could even somehow get to that station in Springfield. And there's a lot of people that work in Boston. The thing is that, right now, there's been a big development, which is very positive, is that the Pan Am Railways, who owns the track that you were waiting on, that we're being slowed down on, that is partially owned by Pan Am, and Pan Am has been sold to, I believe, CSX, which means that they will no longer be the odd man out. CSX is the biggest transportation freight in the world, in the United States, rather. So they will take over those tracks, and I believe that they will be more accommodating. I think the people that own Pan Am were kind of difficult to deal with. Everybody always told me that the guy that owned that was kind of a tough one. So he's gone, and now there's a real push to really give. So when, I had that experience too when I was taking my Amtrak. This thing just stops. You're going up along going right past Springfield. All of a sudden, the train just stops for 20 minutes for no explanation. And then you realize that they're just waiting for a freight train to pass by, and we're in a siding. That's the big problem. There's only one set of tracks, and there's freight and there's passenger. But, if we could only open up that east-west and build a second dedicated passenger track, that would really be feasible. And they would have 10 a day. It would really be like right now, Worcester. Worcester's going through a fantastic renaissance. Again, pandemic dented it, but I was into the story about Worcester last year, and they were telling us about the difference that it makes to have daily, hourly service to Boston on a train is absolutely fantastic. It's an absolute game changer for Worcester.
It was, along with the fact that several airlines came back into the Worcester market, which allowed people from Worcester to fly to multiple destinations without having to drive and park at Logan. Not that trains to Boston will necessarily impact those of us that have to fly from Logan for work or what have you, but the ability to live and work in the Valley or live in the Valley and work in Boston and take the train will be so much better than commuting as it is now.
Well, that's exactly why so many people have moved to Worcester and why so many people moved up to Foxborough, because basically any place that you're along the commuter rail, you're able to really do that daily commute and then, of course, get some work done on your way. I mean, the interesting thing, Mark, is that as we move forward in the pandemic and we see how lives have changed, the real hollowing out of office buildings has been pretty dramatic, and I think that that's the only thing I worry about viability-wise and feasibility-wise. I mean, how many people after this are really going to drive to Boston to go to work every day? I mean, when you consider how much you can do remotely and how pleasant it was, just to give an example, yesterday I had a meeting with the tourism director of Madrid. It just popped up on my screen. We did a half an hour chat. This guy's over in Madrid. I'm chatting with him. Earlier in the month, I met with 30 or 40 tourism people from around the world, from basically who I would have met in London in person. I hate to say it, Mark, but it's damn convenient not to go anywhere.
I agree, Max. I have a client that produces podcasts. They've got a hit podcast on their hands called Game Changers in Medicine. And it's produced by a company called Dramatic Health in New York. All of the people involved in this podcast are working remotely from home. And some are in Pennsylvania, some are on the Cape, some are in Vermont. We meet once a week. We have a Zoom meeting. I have not had to get on a train since the pandemic started and go to New York or fly to Washington for meetings with my Washington clients. And I like working at home. I like it a lot.
Well, I'd have to say I won't go that far. I like working in my co-working space that's like being at home, but I'm actually out of the house. I don't know about you, but I just spent 9 years working in my cellar, in my basement, and just feeling like I never go anywhere. So now I take a little ride, about 15 minutes. I go up to a nearly empty workspace on the top of Hawkson Reed in beautiful Greenfield, and I do like that. So I got to say, I make an exception. I like having a place to work, but I do think the convenience level, it still negates the need to go to Boston, as you say, or Washington. But I feel very strongly, about rail travel, and I'm excited about Joe Biden coming in, because Joe Biden is the best person in terms of advocating for rail and funding for rail and believing that rail works. And, Mark, there's some other pretty exciting things happening in rail. Right now, they're building, as we speak, they're building a train from Las Vegas to Victorville, California, which is south of Los Angeles. There'll be a high-speed train you can take to Vegas next year, I believe. And the other thing they're doing is Brightline is a train in Florida, which is now operating between West Palm Beach and Miami. And they're going to be extending that. They're building that as we speak, digging those tunnels as we speak. There's going to be a train from Orlando to West Palm to Miami. So that's a pretty big sea change in that tourist-driven, car-centric part of the world, Florida. It's going to be served by excellent top-of-the-line rail. Brightline is the name of the company.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. You went down to Wilmington, Delaware. You took the train. Wilmington is not a tourist destination. I know that many times when I've driven from here to Washington, D.C., it's not even on 95 per se. But what did you discover when you went to this different city for a couple of days? Was there enough to see and do that you would recommend people picking a city on the map and going and checking it out?
Well, that's one of my favorite things, Mark. You hit it right on the head. What's there to do? Why would I go there? You go down to Wilmington. It's about a city of about 70,000, so it's not a very big city. It's on a river. And first thing we got there, first thing we started to do was they took us out to a place called Constitution Yards, which is this wonderful big open air area where they have beer gardens and they have axe throwing and they have all kinds of beer and food and booths and stuff. So that was one thing. Then we went to a place called Winter Thur, which is a beautiful old mansion once owned by the DuPont family. There's also Longwood Gardens, one of the most stunning conservatories, indoor gardens I've ever seen in my life. There is wonderful nightlife in Wilmington, fantastic dining. Right outside, there's Rehoboth Beach, which is Joe Biden's beach town, and Lewes, Delaware, which is also a beach town. You could do a lot of things in Wilmington, and I love the small town, which really tries hard. I always love a place like that where they really want to prove to you that there's something to see. And I think we went to some historical things, which were really cool. We went to a place that was where they invented and made black powder back in the day when the DuPont company first started. They started making black powder, and they have this historical place where you can go and see the old water-powered mills that made the black powder. You can see fantastic art and museums. You can see culture. I love a second city anytime, Mark. You're right. It's not heralded, but it's really fun.
Next, we're going to take a very fast break to acknowledge underwriters of programming like Artsbeat here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. Peter Coles is our chief engineer today, and we're talking with Max Hartshorne from Go Nomad. We'll be right back.
Underwriting is brought to you by Boise Cascade Distribution, providing products and services needed for building material dealers, home improvement centers, and industrial customers. They offer everything from engineered wood and plywood to Drex decking and railing, James Hardie siding, and Advantech subfloor. Located at 33 Fowler Street Extension in Westfield and on the web at bc.com, they are committed to providing quality products, great service, convenience, and value.
Underwriting for Community Radio on WSKB is brought to you in part by Rockies. Over 30 convenient locations throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Florida. One of the nation's largest ACE dealers. Expertise and great product selection in paint, hardware, lawn and garden. That's Rockies. Rock solid service since 1926. On the web at rockies.com.
Join me, Tina Gorman, each week from 6 to 8 a.m. for Wake Up Wednesday, when my guests and I discuss health, wellness, and lifestyle reimagined.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer today, and we're chatting with Max Hartshorne from Go Nomad, which is a publication that talks about travel of all kinds. Max, how can people get Go Nomad?
Well, they can go to gonomad.com, GONOMAD.com, and if you look on the website and you put in the search, you can read about Wilmington, Delaware, among thousands of different places. And again, we always like to celebrate the unsung, and we appreciate the unappreciated. And you can find some pretty cool things on gonomad.com, if I may say so myself.
Yeah, I've been there a few times to check out things. If you were going to... It's winter, and if you were living down in the Springfield, Westfield area, and what would you recommend for a little day trip that might be within an hour's drive maximum that would offer a surprise or something that people might not think about to go see?
That's a good question. Well, I always, I think about my own journeys, my own Sunday drives, and I guess if I was down south, I would want to come up north, and I'd want to come up to Yankee Candle and warm up inside Yankee Candle and go see the new Powder Mountain Brewery that's up there. Or let's see, another place is fun to go is the Book Mill. I love the Book Mill, the dusty old Book Mill in Montague. And if you go over to Montague, you can find the Book Mill. There's thousands of books, and it's social distancing is far enough away. But they have a great little place called the Lady Killigrew, which is a wonderful, cozy little cafe, so you could have a warm-up little snack, and you could browse for books that you don't need in a place you probably can't find, as they say, in Montague, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I've been up there in the fall actually, and it's on a brook. Absolutely gorgeous place to sit out.
Mill River.
Yeah, and all of that. Do you ever venture north to Brattleboro, for example, or Greenfield?
I do, indeed. I'm in Greenfield now, and I love Brattleboro. It's one of my favorite places. The other day I took a little ride just to take a little scenic journey. I mean, there's a place called Whetstone Station, which is on the river in Brattleboro, which is fun. But again, my problem is that so many things are dependent on being inside and perhaps people might be a little bit leery about that. I mean, there's a wonderful hiking area just north of Brattleboro where you can go and you can walk along and you can see there's a trail. But again, it's hard to say in the winter. So, it's a little bit of a challenge. I must say you have to be a little more creative than you do when it's nice. I love just taking rides, though. I like to just drive to Leiden, and I like to drive to Shelburne Falls, and I like to drive to Coleraine. And little towns like that up along the border, Mark. I just like to take a ride sometimes just to see the scenery, especially with the snow.
Yeah, in fact, even Northfield, you and I both went to the same high school. On the Northfield side of the Northfield Mount Herman School, Northfield Mountain and the cross-country ski trails and the snowshoe I had never been on snowshoes until about 5 years ago, and that was quite a treat for a little get out for the afternoon kind of thing, and it didn't involve a huge drive. And there's some great restaurants that are hidden around. I don't know how many are open at this point for inside seating, but I would sure a lot of them have takeaway and takeout. But the Gill Tavern is one of the nicest places up north.
Oh, that's the coziest place I know. And I just thought about this, Mark. One place which is really fun is a place in Hawley, Massachusetts called Stump Sprouts. And you can go up there and rent cross-country skis, and they can set you up, and they have these trails all over the place. And it's really fun because, cross-country skiing on trails is more fun than just trying to do it on your own. And plus, they can set you up with the gaiters and with the beautiful, skis and the boots and everything. But I think Stump Sprouts in Hawley is a recommendation. If you're just willing to get a little cold, put on your long johns, put on your earmuffs, and hey, it's winter, Mark. Let's just be like winter. We're supposed to do that. Let's just warm up and enjoy something like that.
Yeah. So when the pandemic ends and people can travel again, and will you feel comfortable? When will you personally feel comfortable about getting out of the area and going on a trip?
That's a good question, Mark. I've been talking to a lot of people about strategizing for my next sets of trips, and nobody's willing to put the date on it, and I guess either am I. I have to say, I'm feeling like these vaccines are coming faster than we think, and I think with the Moderna vaccine being introduced as well as Pfizer, and I think there's 3 or 4 other ones that are going to come to this market, I don't think it's going to be as long a wait as we think. So, if I get the jab, and let's say I'll get the jab in February or March, if I'm lucky, I'll be jumping on a plane anytime. And I'd even sit with somebody right next to me on a plane if I had that vaccine. I don't feel at all worried about after that. So I have to say it's going to go dependent on that. Probably say, for instance, it'll be late spring.
Yeah. What's number one on your wish list of a place to go right now?
Oh, well, I had this opportunity March 18th, 2020. I was supposed to be in Sicily, Italy, and they had a conference. I was going to speak there in Sicily, and that is the number one place I want to go, Sicily. And also I had the invitation to go down to Mexico to go to Chiapas. Those are my 2 places. I just want to get back what I lost in 2020, Mark.
I feel the same way, Max. I mean, there were so many things on my wish list, and I've spent a lot of time during the pandemic watching travel shows and destination shows and things like that. And that my little wish list is getting longer and longer and longer.
Me too. I've been inspired by people. People still travel, and I've been inspired by the articles that people have sent us about the pandemic travel. People have covered all kinds of aspects of whether it's going on a cruise ship during the pandemic, or else going the train, or just going on various trips. But I join you. I'm still totally bullish about travel, and I think the pent-up desire of people to travel is going to really push it strongly, and I think we're going to be really impressed with the offerings and the possibilities that are out there, and we can stay safe and we can also explore the world.
Well, Max, we're out of time, but I want to thank you, first of all, for joining us today, and second of all, remind people that you can go see a whole bunch of travel writing at Max's website, gonomad.com. We're going to leave you today on this program of Artsbeats with a song performed by Alexander Sovronsky, who was on the first half of the program. It's from the Broadway musical My Fair Lady, which opened in 1956 and was recently revived at Lincoln Center and is on the roster at the Bushnell for when their Broadway series revamps and returns sometime in the next year or so. Thanks for joining us today. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll see you next Friday on another edition of Artsbeat.
Down this street before, but the pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. Are there lilac trees in the heart of town? Can you hear a lark in any other part of town? Does enchantment pour out of every door? No, it's just on the street where you live. And oh, that towering feeling, just to know somehow you are near. That overpowering feeling that any second you might suddenly appear. People stop and stare, but they don't bother me, 'cause there's nowhere else on earth that I would rather be. Oh, let the time go by, I won't care if I can be here on the street